Have you heard terms like intersectionality, being woke, social justice, lived experiences? This is part of our life today in America. We hear these terms all the time. Hi, I'm Gary Zacharias, and this is the Apologist Bookshelf. I'm going through a new book called Critical Dilemma. Neil Shenvi and Pat Sawyer are the authors, and this book is so important for our time that we're living in, this moment. I just want to first tell you what some of the people have said who have reviewed the book. I mean, a lot of times you find some nice things being said, but over and over again, we've got some powerful comments here. So at the beginning of the book, Elisa Childers, who wrote Another Gospel and Live Your Truth and Other Lies, she said, I urge everyone to read Critical Dilemma, a thorough, well-documented, fair, and truthful resource that will likely be the go-to primer for understanding the infusion of critical theory into Western society. Peter Boghossian, Critical Dilemma offers an outstanding crash course in all things woke and social justice related. Monique Duson, who's spent a lot of time dealing with this issue, and Krista Bontrager, who are their co-founders of the Center for Biblical Unity. They say it's thorough and well documented. Nancy Pearcey, a terrific author, says he handles contentious issues calmly, clearly, and carefully. He and Pat Sawyer have teamed up to create an important resource for anyone seeking to craft an intelligent critique of critical theory. But it goes on. I mean, those are just a few of the people. Let me briefly tell you a couple of others that I like their work, and so if they think this is a good book, I really trust it. Here's Natasha Crane. She's an author of 4 books. She said, Sawyer and Shenvi go to extensive lengths to explain the nuances of critical theory accurately and fairly. Then they show how it compares and contrasts with the biblical worldview on multiple levels. If you read just one book on the topic of critical theory from a biblical perspective, make it this. How about Corey Miller, president of Ratio Christi? He says it's among the most important books written to help us understand and respond to the cultural revolution taking place in America that's threatening our families, churches, and civilization. And I don't think he's got that wrong. This critical theory thing will upend everything that we value in America. And like he said, our families, our churches, and civilization. John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center, host of Breakpoint. Critical Dilemma is the right book at the right time. The book is well-researched and well-written. They've given us a tremendous gift. So a very important book, and I'll come back to it obviously more than once. Let me take you to a chapter, because I think this is kind of the heart of the book, although so much of it is the heart. But chapter 9, called Problems with Contemporary Critical Theory. Now, in previous chapters, they described what it was. They offered some benefits of it, actually some good things that have come out of it. And then some basic understanding of evangelical theology, and then gets around to chapter 9, Problems with Contemporary Critical Theory. So that's what they're referring to it as, CCT, Contemporary Critical Theory. And I really like this because they start off taking something very confusing and kind of amorphous and all over the place, and they talk about just 4 central ideas of contemporary critical theory. And I think this is so crucial. So here they are. Number 1, the social binary. What are they talking about there? That society is divided. Binary means 2. So they're saying society is divided up into the dominant, privileged oppressor groups, and then you've got the subordinate, marginalized, oppressed groups. Kind of like what Marx said, we have the ones that control the society and then all of the workers. So that's where you get the idea of intersectionality, and we can come back to that maybe in another podcast. So number 1, social binary. You've got the oppressed and you've got the oppressors. Then number 2 is hegemonic power. What does that mean? Well, that you've got oppression. Okay, we already discussed that, and domination, but it's not overt acts of injustice, like, throwing people in jail that you don't like. But they said it also includes just the way the social groups who dominate, they impose their values and traditions and norms and everything that even begins to look natural and normal. So they emphasize that this oppression is structural. It's all over the place through a lot of social institutions and systems. Number 3, lived experience. Now, what do they mean by that? That the lives of minoritized and oppressed groups rival and actually at times get prioritized over objective evidence and reason when it comes to understanding the world. I mean, that's really powerful if you think about it. What are they saying there? If you live it, then you don't need to listen to objective evidence. Your information is more important. And then number 4 is social justice. And what are they talking about there? It's concerned with transforming our society. And what do? You emancipate, you empower the people who are in that second group, the oppressed, the disenfranchised, the marginalized. So how do we do that? Well, social justice says you dismantle the system, you dismantle the structure, you get rid of these norms that have created this social binary. So they said these 4 multifaceted ideas undergird all modern critical social theories, including critical race theory and queer theory. So that's the important part. How about we move along here? They said, this is from a church historian, Carl Trueman. I like his work too. He's got a new book called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and they quote him. And he says, it's all about identity. He says, critical theory today is a diverse phenomenon. It comes from Marxist thought, psychoanalysis, feminist theory, post-colonialism, post-structuralism, queer theory, and deconstruction. So they said, this is Truman now, it says it's a relatively simple set of convictions. The world is to be divided up this way. People have power and those who do not. And the dominant Western narrative of truth is just actually a construct to preserve the power of the people who are in charge. So our idea of truth is not what corresponds to reality, it's what makes us as the oppressors stay in power. So the goal of critical theory, according to Truman, is to destabilize that power structure, get rid of that stuff, denaturalize it. And so contemporary critical theory maintains that everything, I mean, you're talking race, you're talking class, you're talking gender, sexuality, nationality, disability, age, all of those things, you have to look through it through the lens of critical theory. They said social justice ideology, that's kind of a pseudo-religion. This part that we're talking about here, they have their sacred texts, they have their doctrinal beliefs, they have a central grand narrative. So I think that's an interesting way to put it. Here's a political commentator that they quote who talked about intersectionality, and he opens, David French opens with this paragraph. The demise of religion among American youth is greatly exaggerated. It turns out America isn't raising a new generation of unbelievers. Instead, and this is where we're going with this whole critical theory, instead, says French, rising in the heart of deep blue America are the zealots of a new religious faith. They're the intersectional, they're fully woke, and the heretics don't stand a chance. Wow, isn't that powerful? So we're not getting our next generation coming along just being skeptics and non-believers. They have shifted their beliefs, and they've got a new religious faith. And frankly, we can see that playing out with current social events if you just turn on television. A lot of it doesn't really make sense logically, what they're asking for and acting out, but it's because it's something that's deeper than rationality. And then French also says intersectionality is identity politics on steroids. Virtually every issue in American life ends up being filtered through the prisms of race, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And then I think this is really crucial. French says that this new religion is filling a religion-shaped hole in the human heart. Isn't that exactly what it says in Ecclesiastes? We have this hole in us, and God can fill it, and if we don't have God, we're going to go to something else. So, here we go. So contemporary critical theory, it's a worldview. So what do we mean by a worldview? Well, worldview tries to ask the big questions of life. It's a basic set of presuppositions that ask questions like, try to answer questions like, who am I? What's our problem as humans? How do we solve the problem? What's moral? What should we be doing morally? How do I know truth? Where's history going? And so they have a really helpful chart here. And let's look at these two, go back and forth between them. So who am I? The Christian view, think about it for just a second. What are we? We're creatures. We're made in God's image. Well, what's a person according to contemporary critical theory? part of a social group that's locked in a struggle for dominance. What's a fundamental problem that we have as human beings? We know there's a problem. We know we've gone off the rails. So what's the problem? What's the Christian answer? Our fundamental human problem? Sin. What's the contemporary critical theory view? What's our problem? Oppression. How can that problem be solved? Christian says, Jesus. Redemption through Jesus. Critical theory says, no, activism. Get moving. Make things happen. Overthrow this system. What's my primary moral duty? Christian says glorifying God. Critical theorist says dismantling these bad systems and structures. How do I know the truth? Christians say revelation and reason. Use those two in conjunction. Critical theory says lived experience. That's how you know truth. What's the end goal of history according to Christianity? A new heaven and a new earth. What's the end goal of history? It's right here. It's not in new heaven, new earth. It's social justice. So I think this is really powerful. Let me move along here. There's so much to it. It says they both have what we would say is meta-narratives. They have a big story that they tell. Christians say there's a 4-part story. I think about Greg Koukl's book, The Story of Reality. And this says the same thing here. The Christian story is that there's creation, there was a fall, Jesus brought redemption, and eventually there'll be restoration. That's our meta-narrative. That's our big story. What's contemporary critical theory? That there was oppression, there were, like the fall, there was racism, heterosexism, cisgenderism. What's the redemption? Activism, protest, education, awareness, restoration. What do? We're going to get equality. We'll get a power reversal. We'll get liberation. That's the key word. Justice, diversity. So they see it as oppression, activism, resulting in liberation. So I think that's important to think about that big picture that's going on there. Okay, so let's go on. Trying to think here. Okay, you said hegemony. Let's talk hegemonic power. They call it oppressive. All right, according to contemporary critical theory, hegemony refers to control of the ideology of a society. It's got power. He said there is some problem with that. These authors say, but it makes two assumptions that are incompatible with Christianity. One, it assumes no dominant social norms are actually natural or just or God ordained. It just throws that out the window. And then it says, essentially all social hierarchies are unjust and oppressive. But they said neither of these claims are true. So the Bible, for example, is filled with a lot of norms, standards by which we are supposed to live. And they take you to Exodus 20, Micah 6, Matthew 5, Mark 12, Galatians 4. I can give you all the details if you want that. Just email me, gary.zacharias@gmail.com. But they said, civil governments are empowered. They're supposed to maintain at least some of these norms. Now, Christians might have disagreed precisely which moral norms ought to be imposed by law, but all Christians believe there are such things as moral norms, that they do exist, and they're ordained by God. But no, not for critical theory people. They say that's just a way for the ruling class to disguise its own self-interest. In addition, the Bible does support the notion of hierarchy. Now, that might offend us, they say, these days when everything is supposed to be freedom. And it says it has been used poorly in the past, slavery and Jim Crow laws and things like that. But it said, if you read the Bible, it says, for example, the Westminster Larger Catechism talks about the Fifth Commandment. It says not only to honor your natural parents, but all superiors in age and gifts. They're placed in authority, whether it's family or church or the Commonwealth. I said, if you just look at the Scripture, you'll see a lot of places where we are commanded subjects to honor their rulers, bondservants to obey their masters, wives to submit to the husbands, for children to obey parents, for congregants to submit to church elders. And again, they give you a lot of verses. I think I'll skip over that, but you can email me. Well, I'll just do it really quick. Romans 13, 1 Peter 2, Exodus 20, Ephesians 5, Colossians 3, Ephesians 6, Colossians 3, again, 1 Thessalonians 5, Hebrews 13. So they said the Bible is actually radical, not because it gets rid of hierarchies, No, it still says there are hierarchies, but they get redefined in terms of love and service and sacrifice. See, I taught the Bible as literature, and I always think about, I had the people reading Ephesians in my class, and it talks about wives submitting to their husbands. Of course, a lot of people get really riled about that. And I said, keep reading. What does it say about the husband? The husband is supposed to love the wife as Christ loved the church. Well, wait a minute. What did Christ do? He sacrificed everything, gave up everything, and ruined his own life, death on a cross. So it was because of love, service, and sacrifice. So Jesus, they said, doesn't insist there be no leaders, but those who lead are supposed to follow his example and to self-sacrificially serve. So I think that's really important. And then they said another problem with the critical theory criticism of hegemonic discourse is that the Bible itself is a hegemonic discourse. It's a narrative that says God should have complete sovereignty and authority over us. You see it in Psalm 115, Isaiah 40 and 45, Romans 9, Ephesians 1. This is how God imposes values and norms, not just on our culture, but every culture. And the Bible says these norms are good. They're natural. We're supposed to internalize them. We're supposed to model our behavior on them. So contemporary critical theory would have to view God as the ultimate oppressor. But that's not what we believe at all. He's the being greater than which nothing can be conceived. But for the contemporary critical theorist, he's the oppressor, greater than that which nothing can be conceived. So what are they saying here? That all people should recognize that not all hegemonic norms are oppressive or function to preserve the privilege of the ruling class. To protect human rights and human dignity, that should be embraced by Christians and non-Christians alike. So let me stop at this point. I don't want this to get on too long here, but that's one of their problems that they bring up about contemporary critical theory, and I will continue that in a future podcast. Again, the book is called Critical Dilemma, Neil Shenvi and Pat Sawyer. And I don't know much about Pat Sawyer, but I know Neil Shenvi has written a lot about this issue. It's become very important to him, and he shares it in a very clear fashion. So I'll say this, it's a hard book. It's 500 pages. It's a lot of material, a lot of quotations, a lot of sources, but it is so rich and so valuable for what we're facing today as Christians in this upside-down world. Well, thank you for being part of this, and we'll do another podcast soon.